Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, Best Practices for Organizing Services in ServiceNow. A few quick notes before we start. Your phone lines are muted, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel, and please send your questions to all presenters. Secondly, Jeff will be doing a demo later on, so you may want to find the full screen mode now. It will make it much easier to see the sections of the portal during his demo. And lastly, you will receive an email from me no later than tomorrow with the content from this recording as well as the slides that our presenters use. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Don Caston, CEO of Evergreen. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm Don Caston, CEO, and with me is Jeff Benedict, who heads up our service management practice and leads our innovation efforts. I'm a slide ahead already. You have to walk and chew gum at the same time. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome. If you're a past attendee, thanks for joining us again. Our goal is always to share valuable information and insights that you can use in your planning and your activities right now. Our topic for the day is best practices for organizing services in ServiceNow. After a very little bit of Evergreen, we'll dive into that. Then beyond that, we'll demonstrate some of the concepts in ServiceNow, as well as highlight some of the valuable new features in the Kingston release. And we'll answer any questions if you have them. Evergreen is a US-based consulting firm. We've worked with hundreds of mid-market Fortune 1000 organizations and public sector organizations to improve their service management execution. Over the past 20 years, we've delivered more than 4,000 service management projects. We are a full lifecycle firm, meaning we have both the process and technology consulting in one company. We are also one of a few top-tier or gold US ServiceNow partners in services, application development, and training. As a certified applications developer, we actually develop solutions on the platform, which are called scoped applications, and they must be built and tested to the same standards as ServiceNow for their own code. The benefit to you, we believe, is higher quality. I'm excited to announce something brand new today. Many companies we talk with who have been on ServiceNow for a few years aren't happy with the quality of their ServiceNow instance. Often, many people, employees and consultants, have developed in their platform with varying degrees of skill and no consistent methodology across them. Their systems can be confusing, overly complex, and difficult to upgrade. Some are so frustrated they actually consider re-implementing. ServiceNow publishes a regularly updated set of coding best practices, and they have a product called ACE, which you've probably heard of, the Automated Configuration Evaluator, and it's a tool which can analyze your instance, compare it to best practices, and make improvement recommendations. But it isn't free for most, and it needs to be coordinated through your ServiceNow sales rep. So we've created the Evergreen Instance Analyzer, or EIA, an analysis tool that performs actually even more analysis than the ACE tool. It installs as an update set and runs the analysis on your configuration, comparing it to best practices, and then clearly identifying what you need to remediate. The report that is generated also serves as an audit or tracking tool as you make your changes in moving towards best practices. With this EIA, you can bring your entire code base to a consistent, high-quality state aligned with ServiceNow best practices. This can improve performance, reliability, and make upgrades a lot easier. We've created a special offer for this Evergreen Instance Analyzer. At no cost or obligation to you, we'll install and run it on one of your non-production instances, review the findings, and then provide a detailed report out to you on the recommendations to bring you to best practices. The analysis report, which is that deliverable that comes from it, is then yours to keep. This can be very useful when you are considering an upgrade, when you want to move to from CMS to Service Portal, or when you're not satisfied with quality and performance of your ServiceNow solution. And at the end, you can contact us via email if you're interested in this offer. So let's dive into our topic for the day. Anyone can organize and manage a small number of services, but what about hundreds of services? And what if a dozen different parts of IT each want to create and publish their own services? Now let's add HR, facilities, legal, and contracts to this mix. And what if each names their services whatever they want and wants their service portal to have the look and feel that they know their customers want? Because that's what's happening in many organizations. Now, you be the customer. Is this the experience you want? Will it be consistent and easy to use? Will you even use it unless you have to? This is the same thing for your customers. It's very hard to coordinate services across the IT organization from request to outcome. Each silo has hundreds of tools and processes refined over years to manage and deliver their specific outcomes. The work itself can be very complex and substantially undocumented, and tribal knowledge plays a significant role in getting that work done. Each silo is the same in its essential nature, but the tools, processes, and knowledge are unique, silo to silo. Layer on top of that a potentially complex organizational structure with lines of authority that can sometimes overlap, and you can see why it is hard to deliver services end to end. When we think about organizing services in a catalog, the first challenge to tackle is the difference between a service and a request. Most of our new customers at Evergreen have request catalogs, not service catalogs, and many thousands of requests which are redundant, impossible to organize and manage, and impossible for the customers to wade through. There can be 500 application access requests alone. This is actually backwards. As customers, we aren't only looking for a request. We're looking to understand a service and then make some sort of request against it if that makes sense to us. So let's clear this up. A request from a user is for something to be provided. A request is transactional. Once it's completed, it's done. And as such, it usually only carries a completion goal, like this will be done in 2 days. Asking for access to an application is a request. A service, on the other hand, is durable over time and ongoing. As such, it has goals, SLAs, which we're used to and comfortable with around hours of service, performance, availability, customer support, and restoration of service, that sort of thing. Providing Oracle for Windows as a service is a service. Last, all requests are hanging off of or are actionable against some service and are essentially some form of add, change, or remove. There are only a handful of actual request types, and the service owner should decide what requests are needed against his or her service. This can make your life much easier if you struggle trying to manage a massive request catalog. A service, rather than request-centric catalog, has a much smaller number of things to manage, that is, the services, and is much more intuitive for your customers. Another common problem our customers have is that the information related to a service, like what it does, who can access it, what's included, and how is it used, is scattered all over in different places with no self-serviceability. There's no place where the customer and the providers can come together related to the service. For this reason, we created a service home page, the place where everyone and everything comes together. Here we have an IT service where we provide business analytics. We have a brief description of the service offered. So if I'm a potential customer, I can decide if this is what I'm looking for. I can see that Don Goodliff is the service owner if I need to contact someone, and I can see that it's rated 3 out of 5 stars for quality. I can also click on 3 different request items if I want to take an action. A good design goal is to provide enough information so the customer can self-service. Now you might ask, is this what our customers really want? Well, we borrowed the design principles and layout from Amazon. Amazon is the highest rated retailer in the world, and an astounding 2/3 of American households are Amazon Prime members. They pay $99 a year each, and it is nearly 100% self-service. You can't call them, which is fine because you don't have to. I'm betting that you're a Prime member too. When you have a lot of services, you need a way to organize them. A service taxonomy, or a taxonomy, is a logical, repeatable way to classify things we offer, as well as the services we might want to offer. The taxonomy of the kingdom of animals here is a pretty good type of model for IT services. It goes from very broad to specific, from millions to few. The 140-year-old Dewey Decimal System is another good taxonomy example in use at over 200,000 libraries today. Could you imagine trying to find a book, or better yet, manage a library without it? Most taxonomies organize things into logical categories, groups, or even subgroups as it gets more specific. Taxonomies don't have to be hierarchical. They can even be alphabetic listing of things as well. And that's a taxonomy that works pretty darn well if you know exactly what you're looking for. The best type of taxonomy for you is the one that's most useful in creating and managing the services you want to offer. The parts of a taxonomy are meant to be parts of one whole. At the highest level, the framework should capture the broadest view of what you see as potentially within the scope of your effort. Of course, it can be grown or shrunk later. It's never locked down. But it's easier to start with a broad view, as there's really no downside to it. As mentioned, the parts of the taxonomy are meant to be parts of one whole. To provide a quality enterprise-wide service experience to your employees, you need an enterprise taxonomy. Fortunately, the taxonomy can have as many apertures or categories as makes sense in your business. Here's a simple example of a broad framework covering line of business services, shared services, and then two different types of IT service categories. You can also see the general customers for each of these service areas. Here we're looking one level deeper in line of business, or customer facing, which could include sales, marketing, R&D, production, professional services, and finance, for example. In practice, your line of business services will be more specific according to the industry that you're in. Shared services are employee-facing. They tend to be more common in nature across industries and often include facilities, communications, travel, procurement, HR, and so on, those kind of employee-facing services. Unless we have really good enterprise-wide roles definitions to work from, we usually break IT services into two groups. Ones that are facing the customers, or the employees essentially, we call customer-facing, and the ones that are facing IT employees, or internal IT. Now, you don't have to follow this convention, but if they're mixed together, it can be very confusing. Here you also see one of our principles, that the taxonomy labels are for the customer and the framework is for the providers. A service in your service catalog can be presented to a customer many different ways. It may be in a what's new flashing icon, or in a list of people who like this, also like this. It isn't found just by drilling down the taxonomy. But any section of a taxonomy is targeted at a particular customer set. And since we want to think like the customer, then the labels in that section should be in the customer's language, not the provider's. If you look at the two categories above, you can see the difference in the labels for the two groups. Now, what do we mean when we say the framework is for the providers? It's the way the providers can understand the breadth and depth of services and the combinations of services offered. If you have hundreds of services, it is impossible to understand and manage them without a decent taxonomy. The taxonomy is only a framework for organizing and ends where the services begin. Requests are transactions placed against a service. Here we're showing how all three relate, as this is the end-to-end experience of the customer. To help better see the distinctions, we color-coded the taxonomy purple, the services orange, and the request green. Taxonomy can have as many levels as makes sense in any given section of it. One area may only have 2 levels of classification, while another may require 5. The guiding principle is customer-centric. What is the way the customer would expect to see it? As a general rule of thumb, if any area exceeds 7 or 8 items, it makes sense to further refine with another level, as the number of choices becomes too large to easily understand. So what do we call the levels of the taxonomy? You can adopt any naming convention that makes sense in your business. What's essential is that all understand and use the same naming convention. I like labels that are self-defining and they're not polarizing, meaning they don't have a meaning, a negative meaning, based upon some previous experience in the organization. This is our standard model for a taxonomy. For simplicity, we use the term category for the highest level, subcategory for any sublevel, right down to the last, which we generally call service family. Having a distinct level for the last label is helpful because everyone knows that is the last level of the taxonomy, and we chose service family because that is usually what we find in terms of services that are attached to it. So here's an example using Oracle. One of our categories in our IT internal-facing taxonomy could be called data center operations. Then we have subcategories we call platform and database, and we're ending here with a service family we call Oracle. Let's assume we have 6 or 7 different flavors of Oracle service: Windows, Linux, HPUX, and so forth. Oracle is a service family because Oracle alone is not a service. It's not consumable. Oracle for Windows is a service. It is consumable. In this example, we also have 3 different service offerings for Oracle for Windows. We'd have a silver, a gold, and a platinum. Last, you see the requests, which are those actions against a service or service offering. Usually, as I said, some form of add, change, or remove. The line between where the taxonomy ends and the services begin can shrink or grow based on the variety and quantity. For example, what if we only had one type of Oracle service, Oracle for Windows, and that was it? We would not need a service family called Oracle. That would probably go away, and the service family, or the last level of the taxonomy, might just be databases. So we have developed and use a visual mind mapping technology called XMind. Let me take that back. We did not develop XMind. We have developed a taxonomy model and use a visual mind mapping tool called XMind. It is powerful, easy to use, and inexpensive. Our standard taxonomy model has been developed and refined over the past 4 years in over 60 engagements. It now has 700 plus elements, considers both the customers and the provider's needs, and we found that generally 70 to 80% of it is applicable in any given customer. This can save a lot of time and confusion getting to a good enterprise taxonomy. It can be purchased outright for $7,500, or it's included at no additional cost in our sort of standard plan and analyze engagements. Now we're going to shift gears and cover a number of best practice recommendations, followed by a 3-phase approach to success with broader service portal and catalog kind of initiatives. The first is starting with a common understanding. I know many of you have had ITIL training. I bet you found it or find it much easier to discuss ITSM principles with coworkers who have also been through ITIL training. The same thing is true for moving from a technical, IT-focused organization to a services-based, customer-centric organization. Building a common understanding of key terms and principles with your team is essential for success. We have created a services definition dictionary, which is both ITIL and then beyond ITIL definitions where needed, which you may find useful. If you'd like a copy of it, we'd be happy to get it to you. The next best practice is creating that standard services homepage. It will pave the road to self-service, create a collaborative workspace for providers and customers, reduce the complexity of lots of requests, and establish a consistent and logical place to find everything relevant to a given service. It's also pretty simple to do. We have standard templates of home pages you can readily use, and none of the information on it is new to you. You already have it all somewhere. It just isn't collected in a single place where you and your customer can benefit from it. Best of all, if we can empower the customer with beautiful self-service, the work of IT can go down very significantly. Remember the example of Amazon. We really aren't so different than they are. It is common to find every provider of services wanting their own portal and associated taxonomy, HR, IT, facilities, so forth. Creating a single broad taxonomy early on is critical, though. As mentioned, at the highest level, the framework should capture your broadest view. It's completely fine to create multiple different sub-taxonomies, which are driven by categories, and service catalogs as well, inside a single broad approach. For example, the category HR would have a subcategory with services that are logically seen as HR services in the eyes of the customer. The same would be true for customer-facing IT services. A single taxonomy along with a single service catalog with those subcatalogs gives us the ability to apply effective governance across the whole thing, giving providers some necessary latitude to serve their customers while also being able to present a consistent, high-quality, enterprise-wide portfolio of services to our customers. I can tell you that many of our customers, when we ask them about their design aspirations or what they really want to achieve, they always say, we want to be one, and then their name, one Evergreen, one IBM, and they don't want to be 8 or 10, right? So this is a common desire to create a consistent, uniform employee experience of these different service areas. Building a taxonomy is always a group exercise. Using this visual kind of tool is highly recommended as it allows you to work very effectively as a group to quickly discuss, relabel, and then rearrange so as to better understand the range and types of services offered, even as the services reach into the hundreds. It helps you to see where a new service type in one area might also be valuable in another area. It makes it easier to prevent duplication of services you already have, or essentially duplication, and enables you to see where combining existing services can more easily create a new service rather than designing each new service individually from start to finish. Note that we show services hanging off of the purple taxonomy. While they are not part of the taxonomy, seeing the services gives needed relevance to the taxonomy, which help us to make better decisions as to its depth, breadth, and labeling. After one particularly long taxonomy exercise at an enterprise and working with each individual group of service providers in IT, I met with a senior executive, and one of the key comments that stuck in my mind from that individual was, "It's the first time I've understood everything we did in one place." Pretty cool, huh? This is a question we get asked a lot. Should we build lots of simple services or a few big but complex services? Too many services may be confusing for the customer, like 500 access requests. Too big of a service can be a real load on IT to manage and measure, and it might not actually all belong together. So here's a little help on that. George Miller was a researcher in World War II at Harvard. And beyond that, in 1956, he published a theorem called Miller's number. It states that humans can only visually handle 5 things error-free. By 9 things, error-free operation is very unlikely. So the sweet spot for acceptable error rate is 7 plus or minus 2. Now with that in mind, we know what our customer roughly can handle. So at any given point in a customer's experience, they should be shown 7 plus or minus 2 choices. Now you think about your own experience when shown a list of 30 things. We all tend to glaze over. Evergreen's numbers deal with the flow from the top of the taxonomy down to the service, and the number of choices at each step. Our experience has led us to believe the number of levels from taxonomy to service ought to be in the range of 4 plus or minus 2. For the number of possible choices at each level, Miller's number has proven pretty good at 7 plus or minus 2. But from our experience again, we found that the last category can move toward the high side at 9 plus or minus 2, as long as you have in that specific area, that's where the customer expects to find their answer, as long as the relevance of what they find there is also very high. It's important to apply a building block mentality to constructing services and combine the blocks to create new services and variations of existing ones. If all of our services are single-threaded and custom-built, they'll be very expensive to create, impossible to maintain, and probably pretty confusing to our customers. Again, we think about Amazon. What would it be like if every Amazon department had its own unique checkout procedure? But this idea has challenges too. Any service module, for example, a financial approval process module, could be used in hundreds of services. So service configuration management is absolutely required, with each service being managed as a configuration item and mapped into any combined services of which it is a part. Any given service may have dozens of other services supporting it. If I own a Tier 1 application like SAP Accounts Receivable, there are dozens of sub-services from compute, from network, security, database, to name a few, that I am relying on to deliver my service to my customers. I know the CMDB has a reputation as a solution in search of a problem, and in most places, not a very good reputation. This is a really great strategic use for it. It's important to look past that reputation and then use it for managing your services, or you will get very easily lost in the depth of detail. When you are the provider, it's hard to think like the customer. It's human nature. So as you create a taxonomy, a service portal, or anything that's about serving a customer, remember to find it in their language. Actively engage them and get their feedback to ensure your success. It doesn't have to be hundreds, it could be a small handful. As the provider designing a service, if you're ever struggling to figure out what your customer might want, here's an easy trick. Snap your frame of mind. Go be the customer on your favorite modern self-service consumer experience for a few minutes, and you'll probably get your answer. After working with a large construction firm to help them build their taxonomy, I was talking to the CIO, and he asked me if we would help them reorganize IT consistent with the taxonomy. I said no. That's the opposite of what we want you to do. If you create that alignment, then the IT silo walls of ownership will start to rise up, just recreating your old problems. So how do we avoid this? Remember this principle. The owners of any section of the taxonomy are not the providers, the owners are the customers. Okay, so now we'll shift gears and look into a strategic approach for organizing and managing customers. These go hand in hand with a strategic approach best for organizing and managing services. The next slide. Now I've broken these into 3 phases to help show logical progression and evolution. It doesn't mean you would have to go at this pace or in this structure. It's just in general. In the first phase, we're setting a foundation for customer interaction with a beautiful, basic customer self-service portal. This becomes the heart of our interaction between providers and customers. We also define our first version of our service taxonomy at a high level for areas not yet used and at a deeper level for the usual starting place. It may not be yours, but usually it's IT's external customers. Phase 2 sees our primary focus on bringing IT itself into the customer portal. Here we're asking, what are the services? And the answer is the kinds of services knowledgeable IT workers would consume. Knowing that, we can then ask, who are the customers? And the answer is the employees of IT and any other IT-centric employees who might be in another group, like a systems developer in a line of business area. That's a reasonable good example of how those questions can help us. Phase 2 may also see us beginning to focus on shared services as a customer, like HR, perhaps with a pilot activity. Then Phase 3 can see shared services being brought on as full-fledged customers, and then the possibility of piloting service for the line of business customers. Again, just an example of how you might proceed. Now, the density of this slide violates all presentation principles, but I did build it to serve as a sort of a checklist or guide that you could refer back to. I'll just hit the highlights. Phase 1 focuses on creating our taxonomy, our initial service portal and catalog, and the initial services for our portal to give our customers some value, but also to get IT working in a customer services mindset. These services may be individually hand-built and kept to a small number of high-value items because we haven't put in place a process for building and maintaining services in a consistent factory-like manner. Here, we also create and use a basic service design package so that at least our hand-built services have some design consistency. Phase 2 is really a big foundation phase. Here we put in place what we call a service portfolio or our service factory for the lifecycle build and management of services from idea to design to build to production to changes to retirement. Here, as in every phase, we improve existing services and add new ones. As part of our service factory, we also put in place governance and management, as well as the roles and responsibilities needed to run it well. And the nice thing is we can tie those in to the key touch points of the lifecycle process so they work naturally with the flow. Worth noting, phase 2 is where we get serious about using the CMDB to identify the full service. Excuse me. Phase 3 is where we deliver true production volume of services and focus intently on simplifying and automating existing services. The other major phase 3 target is to put in robust service health monitoring, integrating the CMDB and the event management. I know that's a lot of detail. So here are some of the pitfalls to avoid. Big pitfalls are frequently the ones we create ourselves out of our inherent nature. We often don't even see them. The first one would be what we call IT navel gazing, and that's looking IT in rather, looking IT out rather than the customer in. You cannot design services customers want and need if you don't talk to them. Start and sustain a dialogue with key customers as you go down the services path, and you make it a part of the process you follow for success. Next, and we've already touched this briefly, but it's worth hitting as another point, don't let the taxonomy fall into the trap of mirroring the organization. It's really slippery, and it's easy to do. But this is the provider's view of the world, not the customer's. Organize the services the way the customer would expect and want to see them. And last, don't claim victory too early. A taxonomy is challenging because in some ways it's a new way of thinking with some new terminology. Even so, it's probably one of the easier parts. Building the service offerings that are customer-centric and then delivering those services well in a way that customers love them, that's the really hard part. Okay, so that's it for our presentation today, the PowerPoints. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he'll demonstrate some of this functionality in ServiceNow, as well as some new features that are very interesting in Kingston.
Well, thank you, Don. So I'm going to start where I oftentimes start, and that's in our self-service portal. And this is on ServiceNow. This is the service portal application of ServiceNow. And as Don articulated, this is a place for our consumers to go to get information about our services, obviously make actions or service requests in regards to that, track the status of those as well. It's also a vehicle where we can push activities, events, things that are happening in our organization so people can be apprised of what's happening. Now, in regards to kind of the organizing services and kind of looking for things, one place we could obviously start is kind of in the search box here as a way to look for information. And so one of the things that happens is as I start to type, it starts to fill in some potential suggestions for me. Maybe I'm looking for what is Concur, right? I can get a list of results. I can filter this by just the service ones and ultimately go find maybe the business service homepage for our expense management system, which is powered by Concur as kind of an endpoint for my looking for information. The alternative way is kind of going through that organized taxonomy or kind of browsing through how we've organized our services. And one of the things you'll see in this particular portal is this kind of mega menu that it's just a small slice of our taxonomy, but in essence breaks down into a couple catalogs and the high-level categories of our taxonomy kind of exposed in this high-level menu here. All right, and as I dig into any one of these kind of branches, I drop down into a list of all the services that make up or are part of this particular, in this case, communication and collaborations kind of branch. If I want to, I can also filter deeper into a given organization or segment of our category to ultimately find a service. One other thing I'll highlight too, if I remove kind of filters, is based off of what I view, what I'm subscribed to, what I use, and some requests that I make, suggestions can be offered to me, right, to say these are some of the services that I might want to look at or kind of pull out of our taxonomy that are most relevant to me based off of who I am and what I do. Right, I can kind of ignore or hide those if I don't want to see those and kind of go back through kind of organizing this way. Let's look at one of these service home pages and kind of highlight kind of what's on here. So some of the information that we expose on these home pages, and this can vary from one service to the next, but in essence, some of the concepts are typically somewhat relevant from or common across the board in terms of what is the service, and who kind of contacts information about this, who owns it, who manages it. If it's made up of multiple offerings, we'll see the multiple offerings listed here. There may be a section related to health and status. How well is this service actually performed? Are there any active alerts or issues related to that? Some of the requests I can make, actions, the add, remove, change kind of activities are in my activities. There's also, much like in Amazon, an ability to provide feedback, see feedback of others, review and rate the service. And there's ultimately also some achievement, how well it's actually done to some of the commitments that may be outlined as part of that service. As a consumer, you also see there's some actions for me on the right here. I can submit ideas, submit feedback, I can get help. Also, there's some pinned knowledge articles here that I can leverage as a way to self-solve my particular issues as it may pertain to this particular service. So one thing Don mentioned, and I'll hit on here quickly, is this organization, this taxonomy. One way that it can get into, or one way that it can be kind of modeled is through the XMind mind mapping software. And one of the things that can happen with that is we can basically take that data, export it to Excel, CSV. So in this case, this is a snippet of some of that mapping data that we have from XMind. And the value is we can actually take that. If we want to kind of process that and import it in and kind of build our services and categories, we can paste that information in here. And it's going to kind of analyze it and look at, do we already have an existing catalog that matches this structure? Do we have existing categories that match this structure? And do we have services that are at the end of these kind of branches that kind of already exist in our system? So the first thing I would do here is I'd say I'm kind of missing a category, so let's go ahead and add that category. And then once I've done that, I would then add and remove all these items. And notice there's also a description column. There's some edits I can make here as part of this import process to fill in some of the details. But I should mention that at this point, what we're kind of loading into ServiceNow is the structure. So we're not loading in the full details about the service, kind of who owns it, the service offering information, but rather just that structural kind of information. And so certainly that would typically be something that would happen, and Don mentioned kind of a service design package that would typically be done as part of this activities. You would then load in the structure, go into the service, and kind of define those service details, which I'll do in a moment. But first thing I want to highlight is as I go back to the portal, this gets on one of my first kind of features that's new with Kingston, is this announcements kind of functionality. So one of the first announcements, or one of the things you see here is there's a new announcement on my list. And this was triggered by the introduction of new services in our catalog, basically highlighting that we have either newly added or newly updated services, in this case 11. When I go to show more, it will actually show me the specific items that we've actually loaded in this particular catalog. The other thing, we just jump to one, is just to highlight again that what was basically loaded, ignore these messages here, was the structure. So basically to have a pretty blank home page for these particular services to be filled out, but we did load them into this new category that's part of this catalog. And further, if I were to open up our mega menu here, we'll now see we have this cloud applications category in our list with those kind of 11 services that I added as part of this. Okay, so let's show kind of how to fill in the details on one of these services. So let me go to our services kind of page here, and I'm going to look for this DocuSign service that I just imported and loaded in. As you can see, it's blank. I'm going to use a little cheat sheet here to fill in some of the details, but basically I'm just going to show you kind of the information we put in here. So aliases, this can be helpful for searching, also referring to things by different names. I'm going to give it an owner. I'm going to give it a managed by. I'm going to say it's part of our IT department as far as who kind of manages this particular service. And then as far as charging back the usage of this, we're going to do it on kind of a monthly basis. Our version is a Spring 18 version. Already have our classification filled in as part of that import. I'm going to say support group is this LMS support group. Also good to note that there's some secure information that's managed as part of this service, which can then trigger certain activities within change management or highlight to consumers there's sensitive information that's managed as part of this service or application. I'm going to paste in some descriptions, and then I'm also going to paste in some at-a-glance information here, which is really just kind of a summary for our consumers of some highlights about this particular service that they may want to be concerned about. You'll note that this can be HTML, so if we want to link to other solutions, or if you want to bold something, color code something, those are all options in here as well. You say it's available to a couple departments here, just to subdivide who can actually use this. All right, and at this point I'm also going to do one last thing here, and I'm going to relate this to a couple services and to this. All right. Last thing, and just in terms of information about the service, I'm going to go give it a picture, something to make it a little prettier to the consumers as an output. Now, so that's kind of the basic information about our service. The other things that we can do here is if there's dependencies between this service and other services that it relies on for health or status information, we can do that through this CI relationships kind of section here, which is then going to when I do a depends on here, hold on, speedy here. This is going to give me a list of services or configuration items I can use to depend on or write as dependencies for this. I'm going to basically say that we depend on this other service for, our case, identity management-based solutions. So the notable aspect of this as I make these dependencies is that if any of these components that make up the other service were to go down or have a health-related issue, then my service would basically be impacted as part of that activity as well. All right, so the other thing I want to do, just in lieu of time, I've already kind of pre-created some service offerings for this service. I'm just going to link these to our new DocuSign service. And really what these offerings are, they're going to break out kind of different levels of commitments and different things that you would get as far as what's in scope and things you wouldn't get as far as out of scope. And as you kind of can see from this, this is our basic offering that has a certain price. And as you go down the chain, you have a standard offering. Some of the commitments might become a little more customer beneficial. You might get more value out of what's in scope for the price that's going to be paid. All right, so then the last kind of section I want to just kind of fill in on this particular service is we have a tab here for request forms. And this is that, as we talk about kind of the things that hang off the end of the service, the actions you can perform, the requests, this is where we can define some of those things. One of the first options we have is defining when someone wants to request access to this particular service, what is the form that gets used, and kind of what's the experience for requesting access. So I can assign, I've already got an item out here for specifically requesting access to this particular service. I'm going to define that here. The other thing I can do is, kind of see this a little bit when I actually submit a request, is that I can associate my own kind of unique fulfillment workflow as part of requesting access to a service. I'm going to do that because there's some specific steps that I have related to gaining access to DocuSign that I want to do. And then the last thing I'll do is just kind of put a different label for requesting access. So that's the request access kind of component. The other thing I can do is I can list any other kind of catalog items that I want to display here. Maybe I want to display create a new incident. Maybe there's a submit an idea kind of form items. All those I can kind of include in there. So that's one way I can do this, is kind of individually say these are the individual items I want to make requestable. But I can also do it this way, which when I define this kind of query, which is a predefined filter, which basically is going to go out and dynamically build those items that can show up as requests based off of interrogating our active list of catalog items based off of this filter. All right. So I guess, so I'm going to save this. I think my service is pretty well defined in order to kind of show where it's at this point. One thing I'll highlight before I go there is I mentioned or showed you this announcement. Kind of where this gets defined, I'll show you these announcement records, is it looks like this, where you can define an announcement and have a title, a summary, kind of a time frame as to when it's applicable or valid to display. Whether or not there's a link for someone to take them to more information is kind of defined in this link target in details. But then the other thing that's kind of more interesting is that you'll see in this particular case I've got kind of some script that I've actually attached to this announcement, which makes it dynamic. In this case, it's looking for new services that have been added, and if it sees those as being kind of in our repository, then it basically includes the announcement, otherwise it suppresses it. The other thing I can highlight here too is that we can also target this to specific users. If there's a user in one region that we want to announce something to that's in a different region, we want to announce something different, that is a capability with these kind of user criteria. All right, so let's jump to our DocuSign service. The other thing worth noting on this announcements too is that there's a suppression here, so if I hit that, it will kind of say I've already acknowledged it. I can hide it and no longer be bothered by it. All right, so here is our newly submitted or newly added kind of service homepage. So we have information about our service. Here's our 3 different offerings and kind of what you get, what you don't get, what the commitments are, kind of side by side. Our health and status tab, and then here's where some of those dynamic forms kind of show up. And then our different items or actions are here on the right. All right, so I want to go and request new access. And this is going to bring me to another new feature that's through Kingston. For those of you who had used the service portal prior to Kingston, the way in which order guides worked and displayed was very different in pre-Kingston to this. So this is kind of the new order guide experience added with Kingston. It aligns more with kind of how things used to work in the past in terms of walking you through the steps of describing your needs and choosing your individual options and ultimately placing your order. Now this particular request, the way this is kind of set up is that it's going to ask me some questions to kind of figure out what's kind of the best package for me or offering for me in using this particular service. So I'm just going to click all these just to show you kind of how this works. Say I need all this. So my options as it fills in is first of all my request for access to this service. Basically going to choose this particular offering for me, this Business Pro, because of my inputs that I put. And also because I said I needed training and I needed these other kind of installation activities, it also added some additional requests for getting those components. So just to kind of highlight, if I go back and say I don't need DocuSign on a mobile device, I don't need signer permissions, maybe all I need is training. If I proceed, you'll see my choices or selections have been minimized for me. Now I'm getting the basic offering and I'm getting this training request as well. And I can always kind of turn these on and off if I don't want to. I should also highlight this new order guide experience if I were to use this on a mobile device. You'll see it'll adapt and respond to those as well. So I have many ways of kind of utilizing this on different devices. So I'm going to proceed, and I basically say everything looks great. Let's proceed with my request, and I will check this out and order this. And 1 second here. So here's my kind of collection of requests. I'm going to kind of focus in on the access request portion of this. There's really kind of 2 tasks or 2 activities here, one related to my getting access to this particular service, and then the other one related to me getting training. So here's my kind of request for access. You can see it's currently awaiting approval from Alice Smith. If I come out to Alice Smith's environment and I go to her list of approvals, I'll see that item here. She can come and approve this, kind of proceed it forward. And this is where I wanted to kind of show where that request workflow on the service definition kind of comes into play. All right, so if I come into this request item, I do this show workflow. Give it a second here to proceed to its next step. It's in the waiting 15 seconds part. So this is where it's basically going to go out and say, based off of my service definition, and this was my specific fulfillment workflow for gaining access to DocuSign, go ahead and call that, which is this request process here, which in essence goes out and creates an account for me, validates my access, delivers my information, and then asks me to confirm that everything is working correctly. So one thing now that I kind of through its process, if I come back into this request and I look at it, I should have a prompt now that's asking me for kind of verification of this setup, which I can say either no, provide some details as to why it's not working, or yes. And if I do yes, you'll see it kind of marks everything to complete. So that's kind of that process. So let me just quickly jump to kind of that service page just to highlight a couple things on the back end of this. All right, so once I've requested access to us, I'm now a subscriber. I'm also highlighted which offering I'm using of this. And also another thing that happens on this part of that kind of request workflow is it'll also kind of look for me to provide some feedback in terms of my use of this service, happy, sad, neutral, static, right, and I can submit that as part of this activity. So that's kind of the main part of the service I want to cover. So a couple just side note new features to Kingston I wanted to highlight. One is you have the ability to kind of manage, I'll switch to, call these kind of meta tags. This is primarily for using, if you wanted to, or making your ServiceNow system available for search. So you'll see at the bottom of any of these kind of service portal pages and definition, you have these kind of meta tags. And the way this works is you'll see these have like percentages in them. So these are in essence kind of variables, so percentage meta description. And you'll also have kind of this dynamic page title reference, which kind of says take this variable and assign it to this table's value for this particular field. And the result is, and just to highlight kind of we're like for example, ServiceNow is using this in their own community site. So if you were to do a search for like ServiceNow, something that returns ServiceNow community content, you're going to get results. And the reason you get results is they're using these meta tags as a way to kind of publish on the page which specific, you'll kind of see these at the top, they're kind of publishing at these headers, these title tags right here. So this title tag is in essence that formatted message which makes it available for search engines like Google to match and find records for us. That's one feature that's added. Another feature that's added into Kingston. The other one that's maybe a little more interesting is they've added one called page routes. And the way these page routes can work is it allows you to, and you can use this for a couple different use cases, but for one it can be used to, if you've got a new version 2 of a particular service portal page, you can, instead of changing the page and changing the URL, you can define these page routes. I'll show you quickly how this works. So if I take this particular page route is SC home. So this is ID equals SC home. So this is the kind of legacy catalog kind of browse page or shopping page. Right now, if I activate this page route, what it's going to do is going to say you can still go to this same page, but instead of showing the content for the old page, we're going to show you basically this new page for the content. So without even changing my URL, just activating the page route, what you'll find is that my actual content that renders is different than what it was. And in essence, it's the same content as if I went directly to this SC landing page. So you can use it for kind of a version 2, version 1 as a way to introduce new pages, but also if you have the need to kind of redirect users to specific content, you can use these page routes as a feature to kind of handle that redirection. So that covers what I wanted to kind of highlight today. Hope this was helpful in being able to see both taxonomy exposed to the portal, the services pages, but also some of the new componentry or things that were added with Kingston that kind of into the service portal space.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So if you found any of this interesting and you wonder what might be logical next steps, here are a couple options for you. If you're interested in our advanced service portal and catalog approach that's built on Service Portal and the things that Jeff demonstrated, it is available as a fully functioning self-service demo. It's fun, it's easy to use, you can't get lost, you can't break it, to our knowledge, and about 1,500 to date have signed up and demo it. And you can get your own login on our website and be using it in a few minutes. So if you want to go play with that functionality, you can do so. If you're looking for a better way to organize services, there is a short video of our Service Taxonomy Mind Map application on our website, which shows the navigation and how we put it together. It's only about 5 minutes long, but it can give you a little additional information on that. Perhaps you'd like to establish a better strategic customer-centric service approach. You might consider our strategy and roadmap engagement in that area, which delivers in a few short weeks and is unconditionally guaranteed. And last but not least, if you'd like an analysis of your ServiceNow instance to help improve quality and align with best practices at no cost or obligation, please let us know. You can respond to us via email. And Steph, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. I do have a few questions. Before I get there, since Don mentioned you can contact us by email, the best email to use is marketing@evergreensys.com. Again, that's marketing@evergreensys.com. They'll come to me, I'll get you in touch with the right person, and we'll get you whatever item you're interested in. And on questions, I'm going to start with Don. He rarely gets questions, so we'll start with the one that came in for him. Why do we need a taxonomy navigation structure in our portal and catalog if we adopt a search-only approach?
Okay. Yeah, I've had that same question before, and it seems like something that would be pretty obvious, right, if you've got really good search capability. So first off, I would say if search isn't really good or doesn't bring a relevant answer, then what at that point? And the customer is sort of stranded, okay? Secondly, search doesn't really fully mimic the human mind. If I am searching and I don't see what I'm looking for, I might think outside of that search for what I would call adjacent options. I'm going to think in further relationships than search might necessarily do. And often, those further options are readily visible if I can see that taxonomy, if I can see that structure of navigation there too. Sometimes people like to browse and look around and drill around even when inside a specific search. So if you look at any of the modern consumer sites, you'll see that navigation is always a combination of both search and hierarchy at any step along the way. Right? So the two work hand in hand to, let's say, best assist us humans to find what we're looking for or what's most closely relevant quickly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Don. Jeff, I do have a couple for you. First one is there a limit to the number of levels you can build the service taxonomy?
So from a technical perspective in ServiceNow, no. I mean, you could have endless numbers of category and subcategory kind of creation or definitions, though Don mentioned this in his slides, that some of the Miller's number kind of slides, and that from a user experience perspective, you certainly want to make sure you're not giving them too much information to have to sift through. You also don't want to have them drill through 20 levels to get to the service, right? So there's a balance there of making sure that you present kind of within that Miller's number the number of kind of categories on each given branch, and don't have them have to go drill too deep, so it's usable and friendly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Another one for you. Can the announcements be based off my subscribed services?
So yes, so it kind of showed the announcements functionality is pretty flexible. So certainly, one of the examples that we've configured and seen other customers leverage with the announcements is if there's an outage or a degradation for a service, that's probably a good situation to announce it to those consumers. So if someone's not actually subscribed to that service, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for them to be, kind of front and center announce that that service is no longer available or currently in an impacted kind of state. So that is a use case that we've seen inside using those announcements feature.
Okay, great. Another one for you, Jeff. Can the page routes be used for other service portal components such as widgets or themes?
No, I mean, kind of as their name implies, the page routes are specifically set up kind of at a page record level. Though any page can be defined with different widgets that are on there. So certainly it can be leveraged or used to present kind of a different widget or portal widget from one, or as kind of a way to introduce a new version of that. The other thing I should highlight too with that is that those page routes they're kind of portal specific. So you could have multiple portals on the ServiceNow architecture, and you can apply the page route rules from one to the other, which makes sense if you have an HR portal. How you kind of redirect users based off of page content might differ from that of an IT portal.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. That looks like all the questions we have for today, so I want to thank everyone for joining us. You will have an email no later than tomorrow with this recording, the slides, and some links to the offers that Don mentioned at the end. Thank you for joining us. Please check the resources page at evergreensys.com for recordings of past events as well as announcements for our future webinars. Thanks and have a great day.